Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining this webinar. Just a few initial information, technical information. You will be able to drop us questions by clicking on the menu on the left on the Q&A button and writing the question. This will be answered at the end of the webinar. As well, we will be the only ones able to actually speak, our guest today and me. And the PowerPoints and the whole video of the edited video of the webinar will be sent to you at the end of the webinar. For those of you participating, you will also receive a certificate of participation. So our guest today is Mr. Patrick Boehler, editor of the Pangolin Reports, and he will present just after my short introduction on the issue. The webinar today is about pangolins, a probable origin of COVID-19, and most trafficked endangered mammal. And I already can inform you that on the 13th of May, we will have a webinar on circular economy in the seafood industry. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Paolo Bray. I'm the founder and director of Friend of the Sea and Friend of the Earth. I am the director also of the World Sustainability Organization, which is an international NGO which has launched two major standards for certification of sustainable products. Friend of the Sea for the certification of products from sustainable fisheries and aquaculture, and Friend of the Earth for the certification of products from sustainable agriculture and farming. There's over 1,000 companies worldwide in over 70 countries, which have their products certified by our programs. Under the umbrella of Friend of the Sea and Friend of the Earth programs, we also developed an increasing number of conservation projects and campaigns. You can see and check them more in depth on our web pages. And one of these is the Save the Pangolins campaign, within which context I will do my presentation. I will carry out my presentation today. So, of course, today is the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, 22nd of April. And in fact, Earth Day was launched in 1970. And currently it sees the participation of over 190 countries, basically the whole world, with events for the protection of the environment. In WSO, the World Sustainability Organization, and Friend of the Sea and Friend of the Earth projects are part of a network of 75,000 partners of Earth Day 2020. And we believe that pangolins are perfect representatives of the principle behind Earth Day, and in particular Earth Day 2020. Why? Because they are the most illegally trafficked mammal in the world, and so they deserve attention, even though many people don't actually have never seen them before, don't have the slightest idea of how they are, what they look like. And also because they are a probable likely cause of COVID-19. So we believe that 2020 could be a very good year to try and really close down endangered species trade because of these two links between COVID and endangered species illegal trade, and also those markets which resell these animals or animals' parts, and to close them down forever. So let's learn a little bit about the features, the characteristics, the biology of pangolins. Well, first of all, you might wonder where the word pangolin comes from. It, in fact, comes from Malay pangolin, which means the one who rolls up. It is the only mammal with keratin scales, and some of the pangolins have even over 1,000 scales. And these are made of keratin. Keratin is the same component of our fingernails, of feathers. There's nothing more to it. And they're relatively small. Some of them reach 1 meter and quite light. And the fact that they roll up saves them from being eaten by, for example, big cats or other big mammals. But they doesn't save them from poachers, from human poachers. In fact, the fact that they roll up makes it, and that they are relatively light, makes it very easy for humans to capture them. They are solitary, nocturnal, and have a few offsprings. And some of them, as you can see on the image on the right, are bipedal, so they walk on the legs. As far as their diet, as you can imagine, is mainly composed of ants and termites, which they capture with their long tongue and their front claws. They eat a lot of insects every day, about 200 grams, and estimated 70 million insects per year. And the pangopups, which is the name given to their babies, are carried on the tail, as you can see by the mother, as you can see on the picture on the right. Unfortunately, pangolins are threatened mainly by poaching due to the market for scales in the traditional medicine in countries like China, Vietnam, and not only. They are poached also for consumption as meat. There's an important dish in China, in other places in Asia, which is a pangolin fetus soup. So they're sold as meat in restaurants, and also they are eaten as bush meat by the local populations. Interesting, USA was one of the biggest importer until the year 2000 for the production of boots with scales boots and bells. And these pangolin scales have been banned to be imported in the US and have been substituted, unfortunately, by scales from another endangered species, which is the pirarucu. It's the biggest freshwater fish. You can find it in the Amazon River, and it's also among the endangered fish, even though it is now fished under very strict quotas. Another major threat is for pangolins is deforestation and habitat loss. And these threats, this pressure make pangolins the most trafficked endangered mammal in the world. Consequently, the 8 pangolin species, 4 in Asia and 4 in Africa, are all listed as threatened on the IUCN Redlist. The Asian ones are more critically endangered because they've been the first one to be poached for consumption and scales in Asia, mainly in China and Vietnam. And so 3 of the 4 species in Asia are critically endangered. 1 is endangered. And also the African species, which are now mainly traded to Asia, are also endangered or vulnerable on the IUCN Red List. Consequently, they've all been placed in the Appendix 1 of CITES and cannot be traded internationally. Unfortunately, the trend is negative. The status has gone worse over the years from 2013 to 2019, as you can see on this table. And what about the illegal trade of pangolins? Just some data just to make you figure out the situation. 1 pangolin is killed every 5 minutes in the world. So as we go on with our webinar, about 10 pangolins will be killed. An estimated 1,000 pangolins, in fact, are traded every year, and most of them are traded already killed. or their scales are traded, and this makes it about 1 million in the past 10 years, and with the increase in the recent years. And interesting, US apparently in terms of seizures, not in the actual estimated trade, but in terms of seizure, is the highest one after China. And some seizures have been made in Europe, mainly in Netherlands, Germany, and Switzerland. Seizures of parts of pangolins, obviously. There are some claims of pharmaceutical properties from pangolins parts according to the traditional medicines in certain Asian countries. In particular, the Chinese traditional medicine, which is believed by about 70% of the Chinese people, believes that pangolin scales can cure arthritis, lactation in pregnant women, asthma, lactation problems in pregnant women, asthma, and cancer. However, all the studies which have been carried out concluded that being made of keratin, there are no possible cure for all these diseases. And while China has banned the trade of pangolins, the Chinese government has banned the trade, it still allows the sale of 29 tons of scales, which are supposed to be in the government stockpiles. These represent approximately 73,000 pangolins. And consequently, one can find on the market at least about 60 products made of pangolin scales, as you can see in the images. And 200 pharmaceutical companies are authorized to sell these products. 51 restaurants can provide pangolin soups, as you can see on the images. And studies have found a great number of websites which propose pangolin products. China has undertaken some initiatives to reduce the consumption of pangolin scales, and since January 2020, they are not covered by China state insurance. And because of the COVID pandemic and outbreak, in February 24 this year, China has banned the sale of pangolin and other endangered species on the wet markets. The main study, which has gone a bit more in depth to verify possible origin of COVID from pangolins, has been the study carried out by Zhang and others this year, which concluded that pangolins are natural reservoirs of these type of viruses. And from two results which have been provided in two different times and corrected over time, the genome sequence of coronavirus in pangolins seems to match about 99% with that of infected human patients. Pangolins, therefore, might be the missing link for transmitting the coronavirus from bats to humans. And of course, all these will be most likely impossible to prove, because at the time of the outbreak, then the Wuhan market was completely closed, and it seems that from the inventory, pangolins were not included in the sales in the market, but this could, of course, be explained by omission due to the fact that the pangolins cannot be traded. So, Friend of the Earth decided to launch a campaign to save the pangolins, and this consists mainly of raising awareness through the web, through our socials, through a viral video which we have distributed, through webinars like this, and in other ways. We also launched a petition on change.org, basically two petitions, one to ban the trade and consumption of scales, pangolin scales, and the other one to close down wet markets who are selling endangered species. And overall, we already reached in about 1 month about almost 15,000 signatures. And these petition and letters have been sent to generate awareness to almost 100 in 10 countries among government officials, pharmaceutical companies, and so on. And we are receiving the first feedbacks, and we are opening up discussion with these stakeholders. Of course, also through the Friend of the Earth certification of products from sustainable agriculture, we try to highlight those companies in Africa, in Asia, which specifically are avoiding destruction of natural habitats for pangolins. And in case of presence of pangolins or other endangered species, they have put in place measures for their protection. On the right, you find the links to our petitions, and all of you will receive also a link to the viral video that we produced, and we really hope that you can support us in this challenge. So I now pass the microphone to Patrick, and the poll today is what do you suggest as best strategy to stop illegal trade of pangolins? There are several answers: prevent use as bushmeat, prevent use as traditional medicine, raise awareness globally, stop deforestation, increase border control versus illegal trade. You can answer more than one answer, and thank you very much. I will hide it from mine. And Patrick, you're welcome, and please proceed with your presentation.
Well, first of all, Paolo, thank you very much for having me, and it's a great privilege to be able to participate in the webinar and to showcase our work. I hope it's of interest. It is. I should also say that I'm a journalist by trade, so I'm not a wildlife expert. I'm not an expert in virology or in anything. What I am is a reporter and an editor. And this investigation that I'm going to talk to you about has been is the work of reporting, talking to sources in Africa and Asia, poachers, talking to traders, talking to middlemen in the trade of pangolins, and talking to people who buy pangolin scales legally and illegally across the supply chain. The result of this investigation was the Pangolin Reports, a collaborative investigation of journalists in Africa, in Asia, and in Europe that we published in September last year. So the main investigation was published in September last year. I will share the link with you later. And this is really an investigation into the supply chain from roadside food stalls in Cameroon to pharmaceutical companies in China. But we're still investigating. We are actually still reporting and looking into the trade. So if amongst you are people who are interested in this trade, or if you have any leads or information, do get in touch. I'd love to learn from you as well. This is, Paolo's already showed you, this is a pangolin. This is a pangolin we captured in, that was captured in Nepal by poachers, and this is an NGO in Nepal that is trying to take care of these captured animals. You see, they're extremely cute. They're absolutely harmless. They don't do any danger unless you're a termite or an ant. You will never be hurt by a pangolin. But you'll see that with the next photo, this is a photo in Taiwan. And you see when they curl up, like Paolo said, they curl up when they're nervous. This is at the shelter in Taiwan that has really been a success story in terms of turning poachers and hunters into uh, um, people who really take care of the environment. They're actually looking out for pangolins. They have been able to turn around incentives and really change an illegal industry and made it legal and made it something where pangolins are no longer poached but protected. So in Taiwan. So these are the journalists we've worked with and the countries. And you see, this is an investigation that went across the supply chain. So you see media outlets in Nigeria, in China, in Cameroon, in China, in India, in Nepal, in all of Southeast Asia. And the purpose was really to kind of find out what was happening. We had these reports that customs seized X amount of pangolin scales every few months, and the reports were becoming more and more regular. So when a group of journalists, leading investigative journalists from around Asia met in Seoul, South Korea in 2018, we said, we need to look into this because we have no explanation of what is actually happening, who is behind these shipments of pangolin scales. Because if you're able to ship a ton, or 2 tons, or 6 tons of illegal pangolin scales across the world, you're probably able to ship anything across the world. So we really wanted to find out, what does this mean, that there is this dark, this hidden supply chain that no one had any idea how it was working and how it was operating and who benefited from it. So we really pooled resources to kind of find out what was happening. And so these are kind of the sources of smuggling that we traced. And you see that really how international and how complex this trade is. You see that you see there, of course, shipments. You find shipments of like several tons of scales by air or by sea in containers. Pangolin scales, those are the dried scales that are used for traditional Chinese medicine or other use, that basically provide consist of keratin, or frozen pangolin meat. Or you also have mules, human traffickers who carry pangolin scales in their luggage. So in Hong Kong, for instance, we spent some time interviewing 2 women who brought pangolin scales in their luggage from the Democratic Republic of Congo. That route is actually not in this map, and the way they traveled was they flew from the Democratic Republic of Congo to I think it was Algeria, and then to Dubai, and then from there to Hong Kong. So in Hong Kong they were caught just as they were headed to Macau, where they were supposed to hand over these scales to another intermediary. So you see the trade in these scales is extremely sophisticated, and it's very well organized. So it's really a fascinating story of crime, organized crime, and what kind of role it plays in global supply chains. These are 3 images from Myanmar in a story that we reported in November and December that you will find in our global story. That was the result of reporting by a journalist from Myanmar, from the Burmese outlet Myanmar Now, and the Chinese journalists. And what they did is they went undercover for 1 month and retraced the supply chain of pangolins across Myanmar. Burma. And what you see here is so they went to this restaurant very close to the airport in Yangon, which is one of the key cities in Myanmar, and they asked for pangolin, and they were offered the pangolin you see on the left hand of your screen. The pangolin was, of course, afraid and nervous and rolled up, and of course they didn't eat the pangolin. But the chef there said that it is a frequent request by Chinese clients to eat pangolins. They're hard to get in China because the consumption is illegal. So people would typically travel overseas to consume them. But you can also find scales. So what you see here in the middle is the skin of a pangolin that was offered to us by a middleman trader close to the Chinese border. And then you can find the products. You can find ground pangolin scales or raw scales, and they're sold quite openly, as you can see here. So this was at a hotel shop in Yangon on your right, and you see that they're sold quite openly and with no repercussion. They're obviously not a law enforcement priority. These are people we've met who were either poaching pangolins or in close contact with poachers of pangolins. And you see on the left, you see poachers at a market in Nigeria. In the middle, you see members of a native people community in Malaysia, in northern Malaysia, on the border to Vietnam. And on the right, you see a trader in a Burmese roadside market in Myanmar. And this is how typically the beginning of the supply chain. So these are people who find pangolins because they're very hard to breed, and they would hunt them, find them, and typically they would sell them at markets. And the middlemen who travel these regions systematically would then buy these pangolins from them. Just to give you a bit of a sense of what it feels like to buy a pangolin, this is a video of this woman on the right. She was selling this pangolin. I'm not sure. There you go. You see the pangolin. So this is a pangolin that was on sale. This is of course illegal. There were police officers very much. We saw police officers nearby. There's just not a priority for them. But you really see how global this trade is, even though the trade is clearly illegal and clearly these animals are endangered, and clearly they serve no purpose. They're not. I'm told. I've never eaten, but I'm told they're horrible to eat. They don't taste great, and they have no medicinal purpose. So one way we retrace the pangolin supply chain is by looking at the prices. Assuming that that the prices go up the closer you get to the destination. So the cheaper the scales are, the lower down you are in the earlier you are in the supply chain, the more expensive they get, the more costs have accrued, transportation, bribes, what have you, the more expensive they get. So what we did is we systematically asked people across the supply chain how much scales cost and how much a live pangolin meat costs. And this is kind of what we got. And it really tells you a picture of how this supply chain works based on the prices. You see a lot of consumption is happening in Vietnam as well. We did some reporting there. And of course, in China, there's less meat because there's better enforcement now. But there is also meat consumption, but clearly China is the largest destination of smuggled pangolin scales. And just this photo kind of is supposed to show you like how hard it is to enforce this international ban on smuggling. What I'm showing you here is the border between Vietnam and China. Now, international trade to China is not allowed. Like from Vietnam to China is, of course, not allowed. And yeah, so but you see how easy it would be to cross the border. It seems relatively easy. There have been some measures have been taken to make sure that the border can't be crossed as well, but you can see that it's a long way. And we're told on both sides of the border that goods come through, and according to the seizures that we see reported by the Chinese customs, they're still trickling through. So one thing we did is these places are not always easy to do reporting. There's not a great amount of transparency. So what we did is what our colleagues in Vietnam did is they put all the captured pangolins reports. So whenever there's a public report by the authorities, by local police, by the customs authorities of like a seizure of pangolins in the last couple of years on a map. And you see here, hopefully the circles show you where pangolins have been seized. And it really showed us that that there is a clear smuggling route. So this is exactly where the pangolins have been seized. And it clearly shows you a smuggling route from Laos going through northern Vietnam to a Chinese border crossing to China. So you see those are very intransparent environments where you can't just talk to the police very easily, but the data really gives you an indication of how the trade works and where it flows. This is something I wanted to tell you that we haven't talked very much about. So this is the case of a group of pangolins that were caught early last year in March 2018, and the Chinese customs were onto the smugglers, so they surveilled the smugglers. And I'll just take you a little bit on the journey from how these pangolins had traveled. So what we know from the surveillance was that these pangolins have been taken from Vietnam to China. They've been smuggled to China, and from the Chinese autonomous region of Guangxi, they have been taken to the Chinese province of Guangdong, which is the economic power hub and a place where there's a lot of center of the consumption and the processing of pangolins. And these pangolins were seized in the city of Meizhou. And what happened then is that the police, the customs, handed over these pangolins to a wildlife protection group of wildlife advocates who try to find a place and for these animals and try to kind of re-release them to the wild eventually. Unfortunately, these animals were very sick. Most of them had died already, and by the time they were taken to a zoo in Guangzhou, many died, despite the best efforts by activists who even went to Western China to collect ants, froze the ants, had the frozen ants shipped to Guangzhou to feed these animals their preferred type of ants, what they assumed to be the preferred type of ants. And so you saw there was a lot of effort to trying to make sure that these animals are okay, but nonetheless, Most of them died. They were then taken to a real estate development in Qingyan, a housing compound that had a little park where they were kept in a park. And then we don't know what happened to them afterwards. The interesting aspect is that scientists later did studies on these pangolins. They did autopsies on these pangolins, and they later found that they had several diseases, including types of coronavirus that are not dissimilar to the one that is causing this pandemic right now. Now, I'm not an expert, and these studies are not yet peer-reviewed, so we should not make any assumptions on whether they are the missing link in this disease. But you definitely see that, like, how easy it is to smuggle these animals, and how dangerous the wildlife trade is, because these animals could have all kinds of diseases and we wouldn't know. And just this one example of these animals, which we followed from, we met them in Guangzhou and followed their fate a little bit. You can tell that there's a lot of danger in the wildlife trade. So what we learned from this was that we're doing more reporting. So we are currently investigating some other smuggling routes. We're collecting data. We are training more reporters to be able to report on this trade across Asia and in some countries in Africa. And so we decided to turn this enterprise into a nonprofit, because organization that does that on a little scale, because we realize the importance of it. And so we're now a global community of environmental journalists. We work with leading legacy and startup media organizations in Asia, where we reach millions of readers. Yeah. And we do some reporting, editing, training, and we give technical support to journalists to make sure that they can do this kind of reporting. And we share our reporting for free. So if you go to our website, you find a lot of photos, you find data that is freely available for nonprofit use. The idea being that it cannot be sold, but if you want to use it for anything other than selling it, you're very much welcome to use all of our information, our reporting, and our text. Yes. So if that is of interest to you, you can get in touch with me, of course. I'll share my email address later in the chat, but this is our team email address, contact@investigative.earth. We have a new website that's investigative.earth, and we're just starting a newsletter today by a dear colleague who is based in Tokyo, Japan, and he kind of gives you an overview of environmental reporting and the key environmental stories across Asia. So I invite you all to visit our website and sign up to our newsletter. That'd be fantastic. And if you want to support us, or if you want to work with us, please do send me an email. And with that, I'm curious how the poll turned out, and I'm very eager to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Patrick, for your enlightening presentation and for all the information you provided. It is great to know that a group of journalists is working in such a coordinated way for environmental conservation, and specifically for these critically endangered species, and providing basically your services, the information, the pictures, etc., for those of us who work in environmental conservation. That's very useful, in particular as these illegal trade goes on, and of course it's very important to know more about it, as you explained and described very well. So let's see, as you suggested, the poll, what is the situation, view the results.
As a reminder, the poll question was, what do you suggest is the best strategy to stop illegal trade of pangolins? And I'm seeing here that we have actually two answers that scored equally high, that each got 25 votes. One is the raise awareness globally, and the other one is increase border control versus illegal trade.
Okay.
And then we're seeing as follow-up responses, prevent the use of traditional medicine, and stop deforestation is of course, and last, prevent the use of bushmeat. Okay,
great. So let me go through some of the questions that we received. Somebody is asking a question to you, Patrick. How much is the global illegal trade in terms of value for pangolins?
The best answer is I don't know. We don't know. I think you can get a good sense of the dimensions if you calculate the cost of scales if they arrive illegally in China. We know that that some companies pay 450 to 600 US dollars per kilo of pangolin. But now think about 2 weeks ago, Malaysia seized the shipment of pangolin scales, and that was, I think, if I'm not mistaken, 6 tons. So you can do the math. That's 600 times 600 US dollars times 6,000 kilos. So you can do the math. That's one shipment. And if you go to globalstory.pangolinreports.com, you can see actually the shipments globally from 2001 to 2019. And you can see the dimensions of the trade. It is truly large. So yeah, I cannot give you a number, but I would say it's in the millions for sure, tens of millions, even more.
Yeah, from your calculation is about 3,600,000, but I believe that then there's a total per year globally is 100,000. So I would say something around $70 million. And the illegal wildlife trade, I have the data here, and of course this includes pangolins, but it's much bigger. It's the 4th biggest illegal trade worldwide after drugs, people smuggling and counterfeiting products, and it's approximately $20 billion per year. That's the global illegal value of the illegal trade. So
I would say it's sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I have some other questions. Do you think the collaboration with NGOs and organizations globally can prevent the illegal trade?
I would think the collaboration is essential, that people talk to each other, in the sense that people talk to each other, that people exchange, share information, and share their findings. This is one of the reasons why we work together, is because everyone had kind of a little bit of information from their own parts of the world, but we wanted to understand the system, how this black market actually worked, and I think it's essential that there is this exchange of information. That also the poachers and the middlemen are more aware of the consequences of this trade. And regarding the last question, I would also add that what we found, for instance, in Indonesia was that the pangolin trade was very much related to the trade in narcotics. So we found out that the people within the same networks were also accused of trading in narcotics. So there is also a much bigger dimension to it than just under quotation marks wildlife.
Okay, we have a lot of questions, so let's try and provide very short answers. Otherwise, we won't get out of the webinar today. That's very positive, but just to also be able to provide an answer to each of the questions. So, so is the source of COVID-19? If the source of COVID-19 is pangolins, is it due to its consumption?
If you ask me, I don't know.
Well, as I explained, and as you explained, Patrick, the studies need further peer review, and one study normally does not mean that this is the final conclusion for science. And in these cases, it's very difficult to actually understand what was the single situation which generated the first case and the first passage of the virus from animal to humans. And so it is basically impossible also to answer this question. Normally, the wet markets are considered as markets where the basic sanitary situations and measures are not put in place, and this favors obviously spread of diseases and possibly viruses. So if we talk about wet markets, it's unlikely that we are talking about scales. So it's likely to be something for consumption. But this is just a theory, you know, to provide some generic answer. And I would like to also stress the fact that the issue here is not so much if pangolin was the origin. The issue is that markets which trade endangered species or wildlife from populations which are not monitored, which are likely to be consequently overexploited. And I'm talking also as well as about the bats, for example, bats populations, is something that has to be stopped because of the obvious reasons. And of course, if on top of that you put the risk of spreading or an outbreak of epidemics or pandemia, then you put the two together. That's even a better reason to campaign, let's say, against these situations wherever they are placed. Then another questions to Patrick. Pangolins are not protected in Brunei. It's a country which is part of CITES, but CITES and other countries don't pressure Brunei. No one is doing. Did you know this, or would you be interested to cover this? If yes, I can help, and I will pass you the name. We avoid to provide the names here for privacy.
Fantastic, thank you. Definitely very interested. We are looking into similar reports in a series of countries, and I can tell you that this is really not a law enforcement priority in many countries. Even though we know about these, we're in the middle of this pandemic, and you think that there's some kind of reflection going on, but as far as we can tell, it's still not a law enforcement priority.
Is it possible to breed the pangolins in captivity
in
order to reintroduce them in the wild?
This is a very good question, and what we have been told, again, I'm not a biologist, but what we have been told is that it is very hard and next to impossible, what people have been telling us who have actually tried. It is very hard. It's the best strategy is definitely to just leave them alone.
Then I have a question also, which I share with the person who's making the question. Which NGOs are you partnering with in Africa, especially in Nigeria? And this joins up. I would put it together with another question, which basically is asking both of us if there is a chance to collaborate between our NGO and your. And I think the answer to that is yes. And we already started discussing this possibility. This webinar just puts in practice the willingness to go in that sense, and we will further see how we can make synergies together to tackle the issue. So, but have you specific names of NGOs in Nigeria by any chance, Patrick, at hand, or maybe you can pass them later or whatever?
I think we actually haven't worked with NGOs there. We just did the reporting. So we worked with the Premium Times, which is a leading publication in Nigeria, to do the investigation at the markets in Nigeria. And in terms of collaboration, there's two ways we collaborate. On the one hand, we work with NGOs, and then we wouldn't name them if they prefer to be treated as confidential sources, where we get information to do reporting. Then we do our reporting and make sure that it's completely editorially independent. So we're not running an advocacy campaign. We will be running, we would do investigative reporting. And then how we collaborate is we would share the findings with NGOs, and then share what we have, and then exchange ideas on how we can proceed in terms of our reporting.
So somebody's asking the second highest seizure of illegal traded pangolins after China. What are the main uses of pangolins in the US? Well, from my side, but I don't know if Patrick, you can add up something. There have been studies by, if I'm not wrong, by the Humane Society, which analyze the presence of online resellers of pangolin parts in the US, and they found plenty of them, and they are all listed and so on. So I believe that there are still some companies, maybe pharmaceutical or pseudo-pharmaceutical companies in the US, which propose this as part of their offer of traditional medicine. Am I right, Patrick, or do you think there's also some other?
I can only. It sounds right. We haven't done any reporting on the US. We're looking into it now to get a better understanding. So I hope to have some results on more detail on that in the coming weeks and months.
So check their website. Check Patrick's website. So, which is the relevance of Ethiopia in the illegal trade of pangolin?
I have to say I don't know at this point. I'm not because we didn't do any reporting for this so far in Ethiopia. If you're interested or have any information, we could definitely look into it.
Yeah, maybe I can jump in. Basically, there are some countries in Africa which don't have pangolins in their territory, and for this reason, being unsuspected, basically, and unchecked for these products or the scales mainly, have been used for trading the product through them to Asia. And so some of them have been involved. I don't know if Ethiopia holds pangolins. Sorry about, I'm ignorant on this. I don't remember. There are several countries in Africa which do. But so maybe this is also the answer. In case a country does not have pangolin, it is used because it's unsuspected by the custom.
Mhm.
So then somebody is commenting about our poll, and he suggests, or she suggests, that we added some more options. For example, tourism, and he's suggesting something about putting transmitters on pangolins. Let me go back to the question. And follow them and hire locals. Do you think that that's a way forward? And also, we should have an option to pressure the Chinese and Vietnam government more. But I think maybe if you can focus on the tourism possibility, Patrick.
Mhm. I would be I mean, of course, most of these pangolins, it's hard to, they are in the wild, so they're hard to be tracked in the first place. But one example was, I encourage you to read our reporting in Taiwan, where they provided alternative livelihoods as forest rangers to people who were poachers in the past. So they have substituted the income of poachers.
Okay.
So that could be a model for other countries, perhaps as well.
Well, somebody is bringing in another subject from India. Thanks for Patrick, nice presentation. In India, especially in northeastern states, there are lots of illegal fish trading going on. The fishes which are used in the ornamental fish, as ornamental fish, many to European countries and the US. How can we address it, working on it together? Well, definitely, as far as WSO is concerned, we are interested to work on that. I think Patrick can answer for his organization.
We're a tiny group of journalists, and we have to be very strategic in what reporting we do. So there's so many stories there, but definitely you talk about a very important story that will keep us busy for years to come, because the fish catch numbers are falling, and the quality of the catch is also falling. So I think it's definitely something we'll be thinking about in the future.
So somebody is commenting, maybe the traders and maybe also the poachers need this I add need to be aware first and really understand this threat. Also, the importers and exporters need to be tracked down by their respective governments. As an example mentioned in the slide, what would you say? Well, we are working on that too. So we have done a great work in identifying all the possible stakeholders, not only in China, but in all those countries where pangolins are killed or traded. And of course, the rate of feedback is very low, but we did get some feedback, and hopefully this will open up doors also to make awareness. We need also the collaboration of media, and we are in talks with several medias in Nigeria, for example, which is considered to be a little bit like the hub for the trade from Africa. And we hope that we'll be able to raise awareness also through these major media. You want to add up something, Patrick? To make awareness to traders.
To traders.
Like traders in Africa, I suppose, or.
I mean, perhaps I could talk about one project that we are looking into in another country, which I'm not going to name because we're still looking into it. We're looking at using our reporting for teaching material for secondary schools in that country. because we found that there's just very limited education on the wildlife trade and its consequences. And so we've been talking to people who work on school curricula in that country to make sure that this is something that is taught in these schools. What are the consequences if there are no more pangolins in these areas? What are the consequences to other life?
Yes, because pangolins are very important termites regulators.
Exactly.
In the ecosystem. So somebody is asking, is it possible to integrate your works with research institutions so that the pangolins can be protected more effectively? Patrick?
I think so. One principle of what we do is that everything we do is open source and it's shared with the Creative Commons license. So research institutions can take whatever we do and just go to our website, look at what we do, and take it and use it for teaching or use it for further research. And we're in constant contact with researchers to make sure that whenever there are new findings, like the study that Paolo mentions, that we will look into it and see how we can tell these stories, because usually research is very complex. And for journalism, you need to tell a story and you need to make it accessible and understandable. So this is a bit what we do. We look at the latest research and see how can we tell the human side of that research.
If somebody is commenting and asking a question, if I'm understanding that the schema right now, does Nigeria provide the most of pangolins in trafficking? While living in Western Africa, I noticed diverse countries where pangolins were considered as meals. Thank you for the interesting explanation. Best regards, journalist.
It is, as you say correctly, in some places it is meat, wildlife. It is consumed as meat, but increasingly less so. I invite you to read our reporting in Cameroon, where we followed people who ate pangolins there, and it's a traditional bushmeat. But the one aspect of this trade and this demand from Asia is that middlemen are paying very high prices for these animals, which means that the value, the price of these animals has gone up a lot. So whereas in the past this was relatively cheap bushmeat that is not great to eat, but it is available. No one enjoys eating a pangolin, or very few people. It has now, people who used to eat it have been priced out of the consumption. So typically, instead of eating the animal, they would prefer to sell it to middlemen, and then it would go on its journey to Asia.
Then there's a question about, I mentioned before that according to a study, I cannot find the study right now, but I'll send it over to everybody and we'll mention it on the video once we record it. About 70% of Chinese still believe that pangolins can represent like a cure, at least for some of those diseases which I mentioned. Indeed, there was a study about this. I don't know, Patrick, if you remember which one, but otherwise I will include it in the video to provide the full reference.
I didn't fully follow the question. Is it that pangolin scales are actually effective as a cure, or?
No, basically, I mentioned in my presentation, but I am afraid I cannot check right now. I don't remember if I put the reference that according to a recent study, 70% of the Chinese people which were questioned about it confirmed that they believe in what the Chinese traditional medicine says, that some pangolins parts, in particular scales, can represent a cure to a number of diseases.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I will
I'm
provide
not.
a reference because it
Mm-hmm.
was actually mentioned in the study that I read.
Mm-hmm. I would add to this that there's the understanding of traditional Chinese medicine is changing in China, and that so we talked to one of the leading experts of traditional Chinese medicine in Hong Kong, and he is saying he's going from conference to conference to conference, telling people that we don't need to use pangolin scales. We could just use plant substitutes or any other substitutes that provide keratin for the same purposes. And whereas a few years ago, he will be a lone voice in the wild, more and more people are understanding what he's saying. And so there is a change in terms of the mindset that is happening relatively, that is quite fast and is a source for hope.
Okay, somebody very kindly sent here the report that I mentioned in my presentation. Apparently, thank you very much, Virginie. Apparently, it's a report dated 2015 by Wild Aid, which found that 70% of Chinese citizens surveyed believed pangolin scales could cure rheumatism, skin disorders, and infections.
Mm-hmm.
They're also thought to cure cancer and arthritis. So thank you very much for providing this. And the very last question is, what can we do about this, us citizens and the general public and consumers? What can we do? I think awareness has increased a lot in these few months. I've seen more and more documentaries and information on TV even in the recent weeks and in occasion also of the Earth Day. So I suppose this happens not only here where we are based in Italy, but also globally. I think this is an important step forward. We have seen some initiatives, and over this I would like to ask your opinion or any update you might have, Patrick, from China to undertake or put in place measures to ban the sales of endangered species in the wet markets. So, Patrick, what do you think about this? Is it something that is happening according to your information, or something that you will report about in the future weeks or months? Is the sale still going on in the wet markets which reopened, as it was declared in some magazines and newspapers, some media?
I think it's very important to stress in the beginning that wet markets are farmers markets. They are not something where a lot of illegal activity happens. So when wet markets reopen, it just means that markets reopen, and they're crucial parts of community life. Now, the illegal activity, the sale of pangolins at such markets or elsewhere, is the question here. And of course, it was banned beforehand already and remains banned. The sale of pangolins there. The question is more, is it happening underground illegally? And that is something that is really hard to, where like a legal rule, a legal ban is not going to change that much. What matters is enforcement. And
if the sale, pardon me if I stop you, but if the sales of scales and scales derived medicines continues, and this is not going through the wet markets, And if it's still authorized by China or by other countries, because it's not only China which is consuming this, then probably even closing the endangered species department of the wet markets is not going to make let's say completely prevent pangolins going extinct. We need also to tackle the issue of production of these pharmaceutical products made of scales, right?
I think we really need to change mindsets and let people know that these scales have no medicinal value whatsoever. And we also need to change mindsets of people who consume pangolin meat to consider it a status symbol. I'm kind of hoping that with these reports, the people who would traditionally eat pangolin meat as a status symbol, who would, travel to Vietnam or in Myanmar to eat it, will no longer do so. At the moment, these people are, of course, not traveling, so I expect there to be less trade. But I think we really need to make sure that the mindsets are changed throughout the supply chain. That for poachers, they learn that if they keep poaching them, they risk there's a grave risk to their environment. For middlemen, they need to know that, or for people who enforce the law where middlemen operate, they need to know that they're not only enabling wildlife trade through their countries, but they're enabling the trade of narcotics and what have you.
Yeah.
And in the destination countries, that number one, it doesn't taste that great. It doesn't give you status, and it is of no medicinal value. And by talking about it, I think we will slowly get this message across.
Well, thank you so much, Patrick, for this message. And my message is keep on following us, go through our website, look at the petition, and possibly sign the petition. This will greatly help. Let's all stay in touch. We already went far over the time limit that we had set ourselves, but this shows that the subject was interesting, at least I hope so, and it looks like from the number of questions we received. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you once again. And thank you, everybody, for joining and following the webinar. And everything will be sent to you, the video recorded, and it will be also available on the website. Thank you very much, and see you next time.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Goodbye.